Hello and welcome to the first EUAP report. I'm co-hosting with my guest Graeme Rendall, and we are looking towards making the best press review possible in these troubled times. How are you, Graeme?
I'm great, Baptiste. Hello, and hello to our audience. We've got a few people in the chat there waiting, I think. So that's great. That's good, encouraging. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Looking forward to getting ready to talk about everything you've got lined up.
Great. We have a lot of ground to cover today. So the first one, because it's the main reason there is such a wave of articles today, is the UAPTF report. It is freely accessible. You will have a link in the description under the video. And you wrote a paper summarizing the content. We will take the point of view that most people looking at that video read the report. What are the main points of interest you took out of it?
So the link that you've got there is actually the sort of preliminary report that I made for UAP Media. There was actually a follow-on document that has gone into Shadows of Your Mind magazine, which only came out a few days ago. So that has a much longer breakdown of what happened, but the fact it's fine to look at this one because this is quite succinct.
That's why I took it. It's a summary of the report,
yep,
so I think it's very interesting to see.
Very short.
What did you extract from the report?
Yeah, so basically the things that there was one major thing that didn't actually drop into this particular report, which I'll cover in a minute, but it was quite striking that they were quite open in terms of what they were saying. The major thing was that they didn't really know what a lot of the cases were. There was only one case that was positively identified out of the 144 cases, and that was a deflated balloon. The rest of them didn't really have a clue. There was various categories they thought they could be able to put them into, but they needed more information before they could do that. And that ranged from things like from birds and balloons, airborne debris, through to weather phenomenon or secret US technology, foreign adversaries, devices from them, or this catch-all bin which they called other, which was for everything else. Now, that was where basically everything that they couldn't analyze would go into. And that was where they said the majority of the cases ended up in because they just didn't know what these things were. So rather than just say, oh, they're things we can explain and just coming up with some fairly, sort of implausible explanation, they didn't actually do that. They didn't do what Condon did. They didn't do what Blue Book did. They actually sort of prevaricated in terms of providing just an explanation off the top of their heads. They did say, I don't know. And for an intelligence document, that's actually quite a big thing. It may not seem it, just to say, I don't know. And people may criticize them for saying, well, we don't know what's going on. But actually, if you live in and work in the intelligence world, that's huge because intelligence people are paid. That's their job to do that, and that's the reason why they exist, is to find out what the other side, for want of a better phrase, for what they actually have and how they operate. And if they can't work out what these things are, then there's a failure somewhere of their intelligence gathering or their analysis or both. So, and it did actually say the bit that's not really picked up on too much in here in this analysis that I did straight off the bat from the night that the report dropped, was that they made an emphasis about the fact that they would need to improve their analysis methods and scientific methods to be able to work out what some of these things were. So that's a huge thing as well, because it's one thing being able to try and get the information, but then to understand it, and then for also to admit that they haven't got the technology or the processes to be able to understand what's going on. That's a big thing as well, because that means that
particularly coming from the United States intelligence services, they have 17 intelligence agencies in the United States, and they can't explain most of the reports.
That's right. So, and they must have time scientists and analysis staff that they can go to look at information that they've been gathering and collating to work out some idea of what what's going on there. But because they've actually come out in this report and said we need to improve and advance our analysis capabilities before we can even begin to work out what's happening, that again, that's huge, because that means that they're not at that stage yet, and it could be years in the future, it could be decades in the future before they get to that point where they can sort of understand what's going on. So there's not, I haven't seen a huge amount of sort of coverage of that particular side. It's all been sort of about, oh well, they've got all these cases, they don't know what they are. Oh, there's not much in this report. It doesn't go into an admission that there's a huge problem in terms of all their aliens or all this kind of thing. So, but actually, no, it's not that kind of report. This is for public consumption, and for an intelligence agent, sort of organization to just say we don't know, that's actually a big thing. And then to say that we need to improve our analysis methods to work out what's going on, again, that's a big thing. So those were the two big takeaways from the report. There were some others, but they were the really two big things.
I agree. The admission of weakness is extremely rare coming from the United States. The previous one is quite recent. It was for the 6th of January insurrection, and the previous one before that was 9/11. They're very rare and far between.
But look at it this way: if you admit that you've got a failure somewhere, that's basically an open invitation for your adversaries and potential adversaries around the world to possibly exploit.
Even inside,
there are things like that that they have to gauge and they have to measure before they can even come out with a report like this. So other countries around the world will be no doubt doing the same, but in secret. You can imagine that Russia and China, I mean, China's already admitted they've got their own program of trying to collect information on this particular issue. So you can bet that they're actually going away and they're looking at various things, and they're trying to upgrade their collection for sort of methods and their analysis methods to try and get maybe one step ahead of the Americans. Because if you think about it this way, whoever gets this technology, if there is such a thing, and maybe can adapt it themselves or use it themselves, then that's a game winner, isn't it? You can control the world almost. So that's the way intelligence kind of agencies look at this kind of thing, and militaries look at this kind of thing. It's have they got it? No. Can we get it? Yes. Can we adapt? Can we use it? Can we adapt it? And that's how they think. So there'll be a little kind of arms race in terms of trying to gather information and use it. And determine what's going on, and maybe so they can get it ahead of the opposition. So there's all that kind of angle as well. I know people talk about a possible threat narrative that keeps getting pushed by certain people, but that's sort of presupposing that whatever this is actually a threat, and we still don't even know what it is. But
yes,
intelligence agencies,
we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, but intelligence agencies look at that kind of thing. That's what they're there for, to watch for perceived threats. So that's their whole modus operandi. So yeah.
Did you read the Russian reaction back in last August?
Oh, there's been a few, but which one are you talking about, Baptiste?
The one mocking the United States because they stated that they were looking into the phenomenon for 70 years and they were surprised that the United States just realized it existed.
Yeah, well, they're always going to make political capital out of that, aren't they? It's an easy win for the Russians or anybody else to say, you've had 70 years to try and work out what this is. Why are you just concentrated on it now? And actually, that's obviously not the case, because the Americans have looked at it in the past. Some of it's been open, like Blue Book, and some of it hasn't. And there's been much more secretive programs to look at the issue. So it's not fair really to say that they haven't been looking at it. But it's you can see how that plays to a domestic audience in Russia,
yes,
and you can
course.
see how it. Yeah, that's right. But you can also see how it plays to other people around the world who aren't that fond of the Americans either. So it's for a lot of people's consumption, that particular thing, and also it for a domestic American audience who may not be too aware of what's gone in the history of ufology, that they might think, oh yeah, our sort of powers that be are dropping the ball on looking at this. So it plays out quite well to a lot of different places. But the Russians are quite good at that anyway. So
yes, well, it was a gold for them.
yes, definitely open goal for them. Yes.
So the next part is the big part of today's report. Christopher Mellon, that is usually very discreet, started 1 week ago to become very open about his position on the alien hypothesis. And how to describe it? So it starts on the day before the release of the report, and it stated the most interesting facts pushing for the extraterrestrial hypothesis. What did you think of his paper?
So I had another look at it tonight before I came on here, and part of me was really surprised that he was sort of pushing it so hard. That I mean, I know it says don't dismiss it, and it's not him saying this is what I think it is. He's just saying don't rule it out. But I think it's quite surprising that he's trying to actually draw attention to it as much, because I would have thought that's a surefire way of not getting people on side, especially the people that you want to get on board with trying to get more funding, trying to get more resources into looking at UAP. I would have thought it would have been not better, but more advantageous when you're talking to military people and intelligence people, who make decisions, and government as well, to actually sort of equal it out a bit with more kind of domestic kind of threats or adversaries, and put it all together as none of them have any sort of one's better than the other in terms of a possible solution. And I just think there's still too much stigma attached to extraterrestrials, aliens, whatever you want to call them, that to push it front and center. I think I don't know. I was just a little bit kind of I don't know, made a little bit uncomfortable seeing it so front and center from him. But I guess it actually, when you think about it, though, it's still relevant because it can be. I can't dismiss it either. I don't talk about a lot about aliens and possible extraterrestrial kind of causes for things, because it's not that I don't want to be seen to be kind of like with a tinfoil helmet on. It's just that we're not at that stage yet. There's too much still to work out, and we can't just rush to the fact, oh, it's aliens, because you see a lot of reporting in the media. And we're going to talk about that as well, in terms of clickbait kind of stories. But that's what the media do. They always jump to, oh, it's aliens. Oh, this man's seen aliens. If you say somebody says he's seen a flying saucer or a triangle or something like that, well, that may be, but it might not be as well. There's a whole variety of things that people have posited in terms of a particular sort of cause for the phenomenon that we're talking about. So you can't just leap to aliens. But I guess at the end of the day, that's not what he's doing. All he's saying is, don't rule it out. Don't say it's only going to be Russia or Chinese drones, or it's going to be weather phenomenon or something else that's easily explainable, or just figment in people's imaginations. There are possible grounds that it could be sort of an extraterrestrial nature for the issue, and he goes into quite a lot of sort of detail about the history of what people were looking in the past, and it's now a global phenomenon since World War II. Is it likely that we're going to encounter probes from extraterrestrial civilizations, because an easier way to get for them to look at us as we do with planets in the solar system, that kind of thing. He mentions that there's no scientific barrier to doing this kind of travel, what we would think is warp travel, interstellar travel. A sufficiently advanced civilization probably just cracked that kind of thing. So he talks about that. But I think the thrust of his article, it's not. In some ways, it's not really about aliens. It's more just for him. He's calling for scientists and intelligence people to get together and basically just to talk over the issue and and sort of look at all the options and try and work out what kind of sensors they need and what knowledge they need, and which parts of the national security kind of organizations in America that they need to pull together to examine the UAP topic most effectively. And if that includes not ruling out aliens, then so be it. But if you look further down the article, he's actually talking about just what's needed to be pulled together to study the article. So he moves away from aliens. That's just the headline, and that might be just like an attention grabber as well, So because if you go further and further down through the article, it's more to do with just like what resources I need to study the issue, and it doesn't really matter where they come from or what they are. It's a real failing at the heart of the intelligence gathering network in America that they don't know what these things are and what they represent. So yeah, that's basically where he's coming from.
That's interesting because I have a different analysis.
Okay.
I think that the New York Times article that leaked some information before the release of the report pissed him off beyond belief. Beyond belief. And he carefully crafted that paper to answer that. Because for those who didn't read it, the New York Times article stated that it was not extraterrestrial. And at a later date, when they've been hammered by the whole community on, wait, that's not at all what is written inside your paper, they added, it does not rule it out.
It doesn't rule it out either. I think it said yes. So so it was a crazy headline that it ended up as. It was only overnight as well, because the first headline appeared maybe 8 hours before it was it was changed to what it ended up as. So it wasn't very long. So yes, you're right. It could well have been a response to that, but equally, it's basically, when you get further down through the article, it's a call just to for them to try and put together the best team they can. He calls it a cleared panel of experts.
Yes. I completely agree. The purpose of this article is to lay down the path. It gives the trajectory of the next years of work for him and Louis Elizondo. But I really think that the alien hypothesis is not just a clickbait. I've been given the hint by Stephen Bassett to rewatch Unidentified season 1 and 2 and cut out every time Christopher Mellon says something, and you put it together inside a wall block. That's very, very interesting, because he also have an analysis of the intent of the extraterrestrial. So it's really hidden. You have to dig through each and every one of the episode, but it's really interesting. So I think it's personal belief is that it's extraterrestrial. I think
I'm sure it is.
Well,
he certainly says that. I mean, I'll just quote one little piece from the article here. He just says, "We have no reason to believe that many of these objects are from Russia or China, and in fact, it seems improbable, especially when we consider how long this phenomenon has been observed." So that's what he says. So he's you're right. He's leaning towards that, because he's sort of ruling everything out, everything else that people are suggesting. But again, there are other things as well. So there's the so-called ultra-terrestrials, and there are time travelers. So there's various other things which could well be, a possible cause. But I think he's right in possibly ruling out more domestic origins for whatever people are seeing and encountering. But to me, when I first saw this, it was quite surprising that he was sort of coming out so front and center with, it could well be aliens, because that's quite a red flag for a lot of people, and maybe people that he's wanting to get on board as well. But as you go through the article, that's just in the sort of the first, sort of third to half of the article. He then gets sort of down to much more kind of sort of in terms of failure of the current system to be able to work out what's going on and what needs to be put together to achieve that, and that's much more kind of safe for a lot of people, in terms of the people that he's probably trying to get to come around to his way of thinking, in terms of we need to look at this much more. Well, I mean, they're already there now, because they've persuaded them to get a report, and then they're looking at putting more funding in place and coming out with a proper framework. So that's great. Well, I think he's probably this may just well be a reminder for people to say, yeah, but okay, everybody says, oh, it's not aliens, but yeah, it could be aliens. Just don't forget that, yes, it might be aliens. So
no, I agree with you. The most important part is the one I highlighted, where it describes what will come next in this plan. And I think that's a very interesting way of doing things. What really interested me was also the mention of probes. And I don't know if you followed the articles in Scientific American, but Avi Loeb wrote 3 articles, and 2 other scientists wrote articles about detecting, finding, discovering remnants of extraterrestrial civilizations in the form of probes, artificial probes that were being left inside the solar system. And to see that term reused here, I think is very interesting. It's another type of narrative.
Well, it's certainly something that's been sort of discussed, and especially after Avi Loeb came forward with these theories about Oumuamua. But there's also been science fiction novels in the past which have had part of their plots in terms of alien probes, arriving in the solar system. So it's not a new thing, but in terms of people like scientists and politicians or political advisors, discussing the issue, that's a much bigger thing than just coming out of the realms of science fiction. So yes, that's another big step as well. And it's very interesting, because that would be one way of finding out that there's proof of the ETH as well, is to find out something. This is something they've sent. We don't know what it is, but we know, but there can't be anything else, and that would be, that would be proof. That would be proof, inverted commas, that there was somebody else out there, and they were definitely looking at us. We send probes out to other planets. It'll be a day when we send them out to a different solar system. So yeah, it happens. It will happen.
That's why I really look into which words are used, because that's how I can track information. And it's the first time I see him write non-human origin. So that too is a term we see arrive very blatantly 2 months ago. And it replaced almost all terms that were a little hazardous.
Non-human intelligence, non-human intelligence is the phrase that they're using. There were a lot of people who wanted that to be a part of the UAPTF, the report, but it didn't appear in there. So there were quite a lot of people who were annoyed and upset that it didn't, feature as part of the task force report. But this has it, and that's the next best thing that he's starting to talk about that now. So yeah, that's another step forward.
And I think it's a word that is much more easier to use, because it accepts everything else and defines that it's not from us.
That's right. And the word alien has a huge connotation. And people still think of little green men or bug-eyed aliens and all the rest of it. Whereas non-human doesn't mean to say it's an alien being. It could be an intelligence. It could be a machine intelligence. It could be a consciousness. It could be almost anything. It doesn't have to be little green men coming out of a flying saucer. So you remove the stigma. You change the name. It's like they change UFO to UAP. You get rid of that stigma, and it makes it easier for people to discuss the issue and engage with it.
I think so. The last part, which is more a little joke for our American friends, is the use of baiting inside his conclusion. Ignorance is not a national security strategy, and we have never before been a nation deterred by fear of the unknown. When he's talking of the nation of the brave, it's I think a really interesting sentence to write.
He's quite a good writer, and so he instills quite a lot of sort of passion in people, and a lot of people do follow him. And if you see things you say little words like that, and that's where people then take it apart and think, what's he actually getting at as well? So yeah, you have to distill down to exactly what he's trying to say. So yeah, he's very good at that, as is Louis Elizondo. So you have to look at all the words they both use.
Yes, yes. So next we have a second article. He wrote an analysis of the UAPTF report. Did you have time to read it?
Yes, I've had a look at this. So part of it is the one. If it's the one, which one are you looking at? Yes, that one. I'm looking at them on my screen as well. I pulled them up before I came on board. So the last part of this piece is all to do with the Nimitz case. So there's quite a long breakdown of it. And if people aren't that familiar with the case, which I'm surprised to be any now because it's so famous, but if people aren't familiar with the real ins and outs of the case, that's a really, really good summary to have a look at. So, but the rest of it is, again, it's Chris Mellon's sort of breakdown of the UAP report, and the first bit actually says, he lobbied Congress to request it. So
exactly.
That's wonderful. Just says, yeah, I'm the person who said can you please get the UAP task force to come out with a report? So he just comes out straight away and says that. And he says he's thrilled. So he says it's validated the UAP threat, and he mentions threat.
Exactly. I noticed that too.
Yeah. He then says it's forced a whole load of agencies, around the country to actually start sharing information, whereas they've been siloed beforehand. They've kept everything to themselves. And then he also says that it's grabbed the attentions of not just the public, but also the people who actually make the decisions in government. So they're actually, something actually coming to grips with it now as well. And the best thing of all, in terms of America, they haven't had to pay anything. There's been no, additional funding. But that, yeah, you may laugh at you.
That's true. That's a big thing. That's written,
isn't it? It's a big thing because it might not, the 22 million that they managed to squeeze out for ATIP back in the day, that's not a lot of money. That's like the wages for a director of a reasonable size company in America. So for a year, it's not a great deal of cash. But in terms of government, when they're looking at taxpayers,
to compare per capita, the Japan has more funds. Per
there
capita,
you go. Yeah. So it was a tiny amount of money, but that probably took that was just something that they managed to get together. But you can imagine now when we're looking at kind of COVID reconstruction, and there's a big program to try and get the economy in America back on track, and there's various threats around the world, so they're going to pay for the military budget. The last thing they'll want is for some congressman coming up and saying, "Can I have a little bit of money, please, for looking at UFOs?" Because that would go down like a lead balloon. They would find ways to go, we're just going to kill this. It's not worth, and it's a win straight away for other politicians to say we're stopping these people wasting money. And it might only be a smaller money. Yeah,
it happened it was a budget committee. One Republican senator strike the spending for the UAPTF research.
Yeah, so it would have been easy for them just to go, we're not going any further with this. Thank you very much for doing the report. It doesn't really tell us anything. We're not going to give you any money, and we're going to shut everything down. Like Blue Book, they might have decided that it wasn't cost effective. The MOD themselves said that they shut their UFO desk in the UK down in 2009 because they wanted to reallocate resources elsewhere to spend the money different places. They couldn't see a need to carry it on. So they could have done that here, but they haven't. They've actually said, we don't need any more money at the moment. We just need to restructure what's happening. We need to get the agencies talking to each other, and we need to pull together their information. And then at some stage, they probably will throw money at it because they'll realize and recognize there's a need to do that because there is some kind of issue that is worth addressing. And then intelligence agencies themselves don't like vacuums. They don't like vacuums of knowledge. If they can find that they don't know what's going on, they'll move to actually fill that with collecting apparatus. methods, all the rest of it, and people. They'll go, yes, we need to find out what this is, because you can be sure that there's military generals and whoever be looking and going, you need to solve this. We need to know what's going on. There'll be admirals in the Navy saying, I don't like these things flying around my ships.
Mhm.
I need to know what's happening. There'll be Air Force generals saying about their pilots getting buzzed by these things as well. And then, of course, all the military ranges and exercise areas, the people who run those exercises will be saying, we've got these things coming into our restricted airspace, and nobody knows what they are, nobody knows what they're doing, and what their intent is. So that will happen at some stage. They're not going to let that just go. There may have been a policy in the past where they just were sort of closing their eyes to it and shutting their ears, because nobody really said, here is a threat. But the UAP task force report effectively says there's a threat, there's a risk to aviators. It says that in black and white. So therefore, that is something that they will address, because you can bet that if they don't, they'll be held to account by the public, by quite a lot of people who will be quite vocal in saying, why aren't you doing something about this? And of course, all these congressmen and other elected officials who were contacted and who got on board with asking for things like this, they'll be the ones who then get it in the neck from their voters, saying, well, okay, you've pushed for this, why aren't you following through? Why aren't you pushing them to do more? So that'll happen. But when it happens, who knows? But it will happen.
What interested me was I think that paper is less well written than the previous one. I think it was more a vent out mechanism where he just released pressure, and I think that part is specifically targeted at MYPOST, because it just hammers down every opposition MYPOST said, case by case, and in the middle of it, in italic, in sum, is there a better hypothesis than alien technology for the Nimitz case? What is it?
Yeah, he does say that, doesn't he? I mean, he has 3 big bullet points at the start. He just says there's no evidence that they're secret US tech. And he gives the reasons for that, and he says there's no reason why there could be there could be Russian or Chinese, and he says it goes back to the 1940s, and of course the Russians and the Chinese didn't have the capabilities back then to build those kind of things. So, and that's been one line of argument against people who advocate that they're the cause. And then he also mentions about advanced technology in terms of the fact that the Navy personnel are sort of not really sort of coming up with the right kind of the right kind of sort of reports and stuff like that. So he basically says, yeah, it's not these, it's not that, it's not that. Whether that's a go at MYPOST or other detractors, I can't really say. But he's actually just quite pleased. He's just saying that he's really happy that it's come out and it's said the things it has, and then he reiterates everything about what happened to the Nimitz case, which that is one of the most sort of credible, I suppose, in terms of witnesses, the number of witnesses, and the kinds of sensors that were sort of shone on this, whatever this thing was that was flying around, and that's the landmark case at the moment, isn't it? And that's the one that everybody focuses on to try and say, yeah, there was definitely something going on here, and everybody wants to know what it was.
I really like its conclusion. Extraterrestrial technology was not discussed in the report because the issue is too politically sensitive, not because it is irrelevant. There was no proof presented of alien involvement, even at the classified level, but the dilemma remains unsolved, and the primary alternatives to the alien hypothesis are clearly diminished by the report.
It's just a step too far for the politicians to go there at the moment. You can see the kind of reaction that would develop if they came out and said, yeah, we're not, we think that it's a possibility that there could be alien technology. They're not ready to do that yet. I still don't think the conversation in general is necessarily ready to go there right at this moment. They're still getting to grips with what these things are. And in terms of being able to get the information together, we're still not there yet either, because they recognize that they've got a problem in terms of gathering the information to start with and then looking at it. So those are the things they really need to sort out. And if that can come on board and everybody can get together a proper collection and analysis regime, then we're getting somewhere. And then you can have the conversation once they get that information and start analyzing it and coming out with a range of alternatives. That's when you can have that conversation. And that's when that'll come into play, because we'll be able to say, yes, but the data shows that it could well be this. Whereas at the moment, you don't have that. You just have the, oh, could it be aliens? But then you've got nothing to back that up. Nothing physical. You've got no kind of data. You've got no, you've got no proof. Whereas you might have that in the future. And it's probably it's too early, I think. I mean, that's just my point of view, but I think it's just too early to have that conversation about, is it aliens?
And don't you find it strange that given who is Christopher Mellon, he made that mistake?
I don't think he made the mistake. I think he obviously believes in it himself. He has it at the back of his mind that it could be this, and I do as well. I'm not saying I don't, but I think I don't know. He's trying to play both sides. Maybe he's obviously he talks to the people in the political field, and he probably uses a certain type of language with them, and then he might use a certain type of language with other people as well. And politicians do. They adapt the way they speak to whoever they're speaking to. So it could be a case of that, because these articles aren't necessarily. They're not meant for the politicians, are they? They're meant for an outside audience.
Here is my idea. Christopher Mellon is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He was nicknamed the Master of Secrets. And we know he has a team with Loeb the Philospher. We know both are working together. If you take the claims of Loeb the Philospher these past few weeks, it just destroys every other hypothesis except the extraterrestrial one. And on the other side, we have Christopher Mellon pushing the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So I think it's just the third stage of their rockets.
It might well be.
They share the work. One is punching everybody, the other is pushing forward. It's my personal idea about the situation, because I don't understand how a master spy and a master of secrets could do that kind of mistake blatantly.
I don't think there's a mistake going on. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They'll have worked out well in advance what they're doing and how they're doing it and when they're doing it. So I've got no sort of like sort of reason to suspect that there's a mistake being made here. It's just from my point of view, if I was, and I'm not an intelligence official, I've got no experience in that kind of field, but I just see the way that the conversation goes elsewhere, and I think it's sometimes a bit too early to start talking about aliens. But I can see, or I can think of maybe reasons why they would, and it's maybe just to push along things a bit faster and to get the conversation going earlier. So there might be other reasons again, which I'm not aware of, that's why they're doing it for. But I'm sure they have their reasons, and I'm sure they're very good reasons.
I absolutely agree. I don't know if it's 100% sure in the United States, but politically in the summer in France, it's dead. There is just nothing happening. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing in the US at a reduced level. So I think they are trying to use the UAPTF report release wave the most to push forward their narrative. And then when the next report, and we had a question in the chat asking us, will there be another report? There will be another report in 90 days. I think it will add the effect of being digested in the opinion. We are talking openly about extraterrestrial, and it's just a matter of time until it's just spread across the population.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm going to apologize to Sagittarius A. He or she can't understand me too well. I'm sorry, it's my accent. I live in the north of England. I've got a strange accent.
Yeah, we even out the English can't understand me either. So with both of us, we are good. Nobody understands us. In a tweet, Christopher Mellon today, I think, linked to that executive report that was leaked in 2018. And
yeah, it's been around a while.
The origin is narrated in this video. You will have a link in the description, but I don't want a copyright strike. So it's basically the explanation of the Nimitz case from a military point of view, with some information that has been very rarely been used in the press. My favorite part was the E2C Okai. It's a part of the report that is usually omitted. And it was very interesting to see this report, because the Okai was an observatory plane that tracked on his radar the object, but there was several anomalies with the tracking. So it's really interesting to have that radar plus the Princeton, plus the carrier, plus the fighters.
That's right, because they're all tied in to I think the same system. So it made the radars much more effective. But yes, to see this information was really good. That I believe that was a report that was written by the military for the military.
That's what is known about it.
Yeah, they use the phrase AAV, or anomalous aerial vehicle. So you see that there instead of UAP. So yeah, that's an in-house designation for what we would think of as UAP.
And what was your favorite part of this military report, if any?
I don't really have a favorite part. It was all interesting. When you see the parts about the well, it's got some of the redacted bits there, but then there's been other bits released, haven't there? Because I've seen where it mentions, Lieutenant Dietrich's name, and her call sign has now come out as well, because she was called Cardiac back then. So that to me, that was interesting. You were finding out a little bit some more information about that, and there was a story behind that which she mentioned on Twitter as well, about how that name came across. And that was a first call sign. So yeah, that was interesting. Most of the information in there is pretty well known, for people who have looked at the case in depth.
Yes, it's an old report. It's 2018.
That's right. It just reinforces just how important this case is. That's what I would say. There's so much to it.
Yes. But what is interesting is that it's a confirmation of other reports and testimonies. It's another piece of a puzzle that goes in the same way. That's my interest. But it dates back to 2009, and it has been released in 2018, or leaked. It depends on the point of view.
Yeah.
So then we have another tweet from Christopher Mellon today, I think, July 7, yesterday, about UAPtheory.com. So for those who don't know that website, it's made by a German physicist called Thor, that I know very well, because I talked to him as soon as he published his study. And it's a way of explaining very simply how UAP can move without any exhaust by deforming in a very simple way space-time around them. So it's a very elegant theory called geodesic moving, and I highly, and I always, I love that theory. I was very happy that Christopher Mellon tweeted it earlier, and a very, very interesting study. So next we have your big article. I felt your tone when I was reading it, and I could hear your voice saying the text. That's just great. So I will just put one extract of the video. So people get the tone, and I will ask you to explain what is the House of Lords afterwards, because for
Okay,
the international community, I think it's
that's
a bit
fine.
blurry.
My Lords, the time allowed for this question has elapsed. My Lords, we now come to the fourth oral question. Lord, start for us.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
I call the Minister, Baroness Goldie.
My Lords, the Ministry of Defence notes the content of the report. The department holds no reports on unidentified aerial phenomena, but constantly monitors UK airspace to identify and respond to any credible threat to its integrity, and is confident in the existing measures in place to protect it.
So the next 10 minutes are pretty much the same the same thing said again and again. But before everything else, I want to commend the strength of your lords. They asked the same questions 8 or 9 times without fail. That's amazing. I would love to have these lords in the French
Well,
assembly.
this is what they do. This is what they do. So the House of Lords is one of the two main political institutions in terms of decision making in the UK. We have the House of Commons, who are elected members of Parliament, and we have the House of Lords, who aren't. But they're what we call the second chamber, and they're the people who look at legislation that the government, as in the House of Commons, are trying to enact, and they're the people who will look at the legislation line by line, and they debate it, and then if they're not happy, it goes back to the government to be redone, if you like, and then it goes back again. So there's this constant going backwards and forwards of the legislation until it's put down in a way that it works, or theoretically works anyway.
Mhm.
So that's the difference between the Commons and the Lords. So you get debates in both chambers, in the House of Commons, which is the ones that you'll see mostly on television, and they're the ones that make headlines around the world. So that's the people with Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition. But then again, so you also got these lords and ladies and baronesses and barons, or they're all elected. Non-elected peers of the realm is what they used to call them.
So it's a birthright?
Well, for some it is, but some of them are basically proposed. So there are a certain number who are created every year. In fact, there are more than there are seats.
Okay.
So they don't all go at once. Some of them are really old. Some of them don't attend much, or if at all. So yeah, it's not that they're basically elected by the population. They're there because of either, as you say, the birthright, hereditary peers, as some of them are called. So the position gets passed down from generation to generation, and some are basically sort of nominated, if you like, by various governments. They can create a certain number, and usually they're politicians of long standing. So you might have a long career as a politician in, say, a Conservative or a Labour government, and then you become a Lord. So you get what they call elevated to the House of Lords. So you then go and sit there for a bit, and for the remainder of your life usually, because it tends to be they have to carry them out in a box. So
between the Commons and the Lords, which one has the most political power or efficiency?
Well, the Commons effectively the Commons do have the power in the end, because for all the House of Lords can throw back legislation and say this doesn't work, you've got to rethink it. They can only do that so many times before they get worn down. So it does have, but you get some interesting debates that you wouldn't get in the Commons. So this is why, if you ever look at Hansard, which is the official record of all the debates in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, you will see that the UFO debates in history have always occurred in the Lords, and there have been several.
Interesting.
There have been a few in the past, but this is the latest one. Yes. So what do you think the tone of my article was, Baptiste?
I don't know how to say it in English. In French, we would say that you talk with fiel in your mouth. It's a kind of poison.
Yeah, that'd be about right. Yeah. spitting feathers.
But
I think we call it
it's a feel that it's a very foul taste. You know exactly
one.
that you are being poisoned when you take it.
So you saw the clip there that you played, and you heard Baroness Goldie. She's the Minister for Defence in the Lords. You would have seen her answer, but you wouldn't have heard his question, Lord Saffraz, because he came up with the first question. So I'll just read out his question, and he said.
Sure.
And because that's the way that this sometimes works, the first questions don't always get read out, and just all you hear is the reply, because they already have the notes which have the questions down. And basically what he asked was to ask Her Majesty's government what assessment they have made of the report by the United States Office of the Director of Naval Intelligence, preliminary assessment, unidentified aerial phenomenon, published on 25th of June, and what data they hold on unidentified flying object sightings in the United Kingdom. So that was the first question which was asked. And that's when Baroness Goldie said that, the note of the report, they don't hold reports on UFOs or UAPs, but they constantly monitor UK airspace and respond to any threats. So that's the usual line, because you're not going to get a UK government who says, we don't care what goes on the skies above the UK. They are going to say that we take note of what's happening. Now, they said they took note of the report, but that's just a courtesy. That's tend to be the things that's political language for say, yeah, we know there's a report. That doesn't mean to say they've looked at it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it just says they note the contents of the report. So that could mean that they've gone line by line, that somewhere in the MOD they've gone through it line by line, or it could be that they've just had a quick look at the summary. So they don't even know if they've actually seen the classified report, or whether they just looked at the unclassified one. And it might just be that they've pulled information off the press, because most of the major newspapers in the UK cover the report. So they might have just been responding to that, in terms of we note the contents of the report, but that doesn't mean much, because it doesn't say how much and who looked at it. So I go into a bit of detail in the article about what does that actually mean, and I still don't know. Now the usual line
at that point there are several interpretations of that sentence.
Yes, there can be. So it just says, the Ministry of Defence notes the contents of the report. But what does that mean? Does it mean they've looked at it in depth? Does it look like they've had access to the classified section of the report? So have they gone through that in depth? You'd like to think they have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean almost anything.
Is there a way for a law to diplomatically ask if they really took advice on?
Well, they can ask the question, but they're not necessarily going to get an answer, because if you see the answer to that question, then that's the one where they just say, what. So he's asking what assessment have they made? They haven't. They don't say they've made an assessment, do they? So this is the whole thing about political debate, especially in the UK. It's probably like this around the world. A politician will get asked a question, but they don't always answer them in the way that you think that you would answer a direct question. They'll go what we call go around the houses. They'll not answer the question directly. They'll answer other things and bring other things into a reply, which a lot of the time don't have anything to do with the actual answer. It's just a way of answering the question without answering it, if you know what I mean. And that's how they do it.
Is she obligated to answer something?
No.
Okay.
No, they answer the way they want. And if you ever see any of the debates in the House of Commons, where on a Wednesday at lunchtime there's what are called Prime Minister's questions. So Boris Johnson has to field 6 questions from the Leader of Opposition. He has to field, I think it's 1 or 2 from the SNP leader in the House. So you'll see this kind of backwards and forwards in terms of questions, but you'll very rarely see a flat out direct answer to a question, unless it's something they want to answer themselves. That's when you'll get a really succinct, truthful, just flat out answer. A lot of the times, if it's uncomfortable or it's politically like kind of suicide, then they tend to sort of beat around the bush quite a lot, and they don't answer specifically. They'll do anything they can but answer the question.
There is another quote from Baroness Goldie I would like your opinion on. In over 50 years, no such reporting indicated the existence of any military threat to the UK. So, in my memory, I have the remembrance of a UK report forbidding its RAF pilots to engage with UFOs because there were a risk for their life.
So 50 years, what she's quoting from there's actually a bit before that in the article I wrote, is because in 2009, when they shut down the so-called UFO desk, the one that Nick Pope sat at for a period in the early 90s, it was basically a collection area for a collection point for reports from the public and from police forces around the UK, etc. And then there was no the desk itself, or that part of the office in the Ministry of Defence, didn't actually do any investigations. They didn't go out into the field to investigate sightings. They would liaise with other departments, some of which we're probably not aware of. One was called DI-55, and that was a defence intelligence department who probably had access to more secretive methods of collecting information. It's not entirely, clear what they did actually do in terms of sort of analysis of reports, but some of the information was passed to them for comment and for analysis. So, the Air Staff Sec 2A desk, which is what the official name for the UFO desk was, it was basically taking phone calls, passing that information on to other places, and then when they got the sort of whatever answers they got back, which weren't necessarily this is definitely what's happening, they would pass on the kind of the official line that the MOD had back to the member of the public who would ask the question, what did I see above my house last night, kind of thing. And that was the kind of level of the questions that they got. It was, I've seen some lights in the sky, or I saw this flying triangle, or this kind of thing. And then they would say, right, thank you. They would sometimes ring them back, the witnesses. They would ask a few more questions, and then they would take that information away, and either they could rule it out themselves sometimes, because I think they could find out from certain radar stations and certain airfields whether they had aircraft up that night or helicopters up that night, and that would be a reasonable sort of explanation. But a lot of the times that information had to go somewhere else to be looked at. So it wasn't necessarily the UFO desk that was actually doing the investigations.
Can they be a bit sneaky? Because they say in over 50 years, but 50 years from today is 1970s.
Yes.
So I think they were aware of the phenomena before that with the Foo Fighters. You're working on it. So can they use the words to hide what they may know from a previous day before 50 years?
50 years, actually, the 50 years phrase went back to 2009, because that was the information that was used by the defense minister at the time, who shut the UFO desk down and said, just stop looking at reports, stop taking reports from the public, etc. There's no military significance in terms of what's being seen. If you go further back through the article that I wrote, it's actually it was a chap called Bob Ainsworth. He was the Ministry of Defence in the Labour government in 2009 that shut it down. And his words at the time, what he said was that in over 50 years there was no reporting that had indicated any existence of any military threat to the UK, and that's what they were looking at. So when you go back to Baroness Goldie's statement, and she used a similar wording, because in over 50 years no such reporting has indicated the existence of any military threat, that's what they're looking at, or at least that's what they're saying. So they've said we have, and they've said we have no plans. Now that those words, we have no plans, that always sets off alarm bells in political reporting in the UK from the media, because that means at the moment. That doesn't mean to say in the future.
Oh, good point.
Because that's always that's a political phrase. When a politician turns around and says to an interviewer, "We have no plans," that's just then. That doesn't mean to say we're never going to do it. Okay, so that always
and
comes
it's
up.
Political code. It's well known.
It's not political code. It's just something they trot out when they don't want to say we might do it in the future. We just don't know. Because
Mm.
because if a politician turned around to an interviewer on some other subject and said, well, we're not sure yet, we might have a look at it in the future, we might not, all the question will be then, well, when are you going to do it? When are you going to look at this? When? Because that's the way they head off those kind of questions. They'll say, we have no plans. And that's usually, yes, okay, it can be code for
That's very
we're not doing
interesting.
it at the moment. But that's not to say they may do it in future. It's just they don't have any plans at the moment. And that's leaving the door open that if things change, then they'll look at things again. Because I suppose if tomorrow there was a threat to the UK, then they would have to look at it. So that's why they use language like that. They're very careful, they're very practiced at this type of, sort of shadow play, this kind of language that they use. You see the same language cropping up all the time in other debates, in social and in political kind of debates. So it's nothing new, that kind of wording. And they've been at this game for a long time in terms of being able to field questions from the other side or from fellow politicians, and they know exactly the kind of language that they use that doesn't kind of draw attention to what they're trying to say, or doesn't kind of put them in a position where they've got to answer further questions on the same thing and get them into a deeper hole. That's the way it works. So yeah, the language is always kind of spot on. It's very precise. It may not seem too precise, but it is. It means things. You have to dig into all
That's
the
why I
wording.
wanted your input on that.
Okay, yeah, but that's what that means. Yeah, we have no plans. That's a popular thing to say.
Yes. My favorite question was by Baroness Gardner of Parks.
Oh yes.
It was just glorious. So by hearing it, I understood half of it, to be honest.
Okay.
I couldn't go through the accent, but I gathered pretty much what she was saying. And my lord, is the minister aware of the role that one of the largest single dish telescopes in the southern hemisphere, in Parks, New South Wales, the place of my birth, played in transmitting the TV footage of Apollo 11 moon landing? So when I heard that,
yeah,
what?
Yeah, do you know that's what happened in debates? No, there was another question which didn't have anything to do with the debate, which was earlier, and I just missed it out. I made reference to the person who asked it, but I didn't include it because it had nothing to do with the debate whatsoever. And you will find that in UK political debates, they sometimes get sidetracked briefly with questions which have very little or sometimes nothing to do with the debate in question, but somebody is trying to make a point.
Okay.
And it might be just something like along the lines of, oh, do you know I was born there? Oh, here's a question about where. This is the kind of thing. Seriously, they do that kind of thing. And it's crackers. Sometimes they do it because they want to try and prolong a debate to the point of where it runs out of time. There are what they call filibuster. There's a phrase called filibustering, which is basically means you talk out a debate until it runs out of time in the government, and they've got to stop it. So you get things like that where they'll talk about anything but what they're talking about, but it's got a very tenuous connection with what they're talking about, so it's allowed. It's not like they're just talking about something completely different. So you'll get things like this, and then of course he's tacked that line at the end of the question where he says, might this dish be of assistance to the government in helping to modify, monitor and assist any unidentified sightings? Well, no, it's on the other side of the world. How is it going to work out what's flying over London or Birmingham? So no, it had nothing to do with the debate.
Was it ironic?
Well, it was somebody just saying something maybe for the
I really think she doesn't understand anything about the topic, but it's in space, and she just connected to, hey,
yeah.
Well, I have a telescope.
Yeah. There was definitely the kind of I want it on record, because it's recorded officially and it's there for posterity. She wanted to know, to tell people where she was born in Australia. But the minister actually replied, and this was quite interesting because there was very interesting. There was more information in the reply than there was in the question to do with UAP.
Yes.
So it said that if they needed to visually identify something that they couldn't determine what it was, they'd send typhoons up. Well, they do that anyway, because I explain afterwards that there have been cases, and there was one just recently, where if, for instance, an aircraft, like an airliner, is out of radio contact, so the radio breaks down and they can't contact air traffic control, and it's still coming towards the UK. They'll send jets up after them because they think it could be potentially hijacked. It could be a terrorist incident. So they do things like that. But also, there's been more cases recently of Russian aircraft flying along the edges of UK airspace off the 12-mile limit, and we always scramble aircraft after those. So that goes back to the Cold War, but we still do that today. So.
What really interested me in the answer is the combination of two sentences. Our air defense community have the most sophisticated electronic surveillance, and you skip one sentence. There is also the added support of visual identification. So they identify electronically everything. If it doesn't register in that system, they scramble fighters. That's really interesting. In the concern of UAPs, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's if they do it. Because they have filters for a lot of sort of systems nowadays as well to sort of stop false returns and things like that. So there could be a lot of information that doesn't actually appear on the screen. But it's not to say that everything that appears that they don't know what it is, they'll send a jet up after it, because it would have to be inside UK airspace. But yeah, you're right. It's quite interesting to say that's what theoretically that's what they're doing. Whether it happens all the time or not is a different matter. They've only got 2 bases now. At one time, they used to have quite a few fighter bases all over the country. Now they've got 2. There's one in the north of Scotland, and there's one in Lincolnshire and near the east coast of England. Down near, it's Lincolnshire. It's in the middle of England. That's all they have now. So there are very few bases and very few aircraft. So they're not as responsive as they used to be in terms of having a lot of aircraft in a lot of different places. So, and they're stretched quite thin as well in terms of numbers of aircraft and serviceability and all the rest of it. So yes, they can respond to certain threats, but they can't respond in huge numbers, let's say. So yeah, they'll probably send a jet. They'll send a couple of jets up if it's something like an airliner, definitely, because they do that. They send 2 up usually to go and to go and intercept an aircraft that doesn't have a radio or a radio that works. And if there's a Russian reconnaissance aircraft sitting off the coast somewhere, they'll definitely send a couple of jets up after that as well. But UAPs, this is a different thing, you see, because they know what a Russian airplane will be. It'll appear as such on the radar. They'll know from how it comes in and where it goes and how it flies and what the speed of it is and all the rest of it. They'll know it's Russian. It's just something they're familiar with. Similarly, if it's an airliner coming in from, I don't know, across from Denmark, let's say, or from France or whoever, then they'll have a pretty good idea what it is, because it's flying a certain profile, it's a certain height, etc. They might even know where it's come out of. So those are the kind of known things they'll send jets up after, because they know there's something wrong, or it's a Russian airplane. If it's something that appears briefly, like just a contact where they're not entirely sure what it's doing, where it's from, how it's flying around, it might be flying absurdly quick or absurdly slow. Or it might be just darting about. They might not bother. They might see what happens before they do that. And of course, we know through the reporting of various objects that have been seen in UK airspace, they haven't sent aircraft up after them. So
interesting.
But other cases they have. So
what's your global analysis of the debate?
Well, it was never going to be anything but what they said in terms of the answers. The UK have always had this thing where they're not going to respond too much to UAP sightings, because they have this kind of threshold of evidence of a perceived threat. So unless it meets this kind of, it's an item of defense significance, they're not going to really take it seriously, because it's not worth bothering with. And that's effectively the thrust of the debate. She kept saying that it has to constitute a proper threat or a proper danger, something that can be substantiated. She uses those words. So it has to be something like a terrorist event or a Russian airplane. Those are things they know, they can understand, that can be proved. If it's something that's like maybe somebody sees in the sky one night and maybe see it the next night or something, they're not going to respond too much to that.
in terms of military strategy, it's a very weird reasoning because you can't wait for something to become an actual threat.
Well, here's the next bit, though, because that's what they're saying in public.
Yes,
We don't know what they're
yes,
saying
of
in
course.
private. We don't know what the MOD are doing behind the scenes. Nobody really knows how seriously they take this. Just because for the public they're saying this, because bear in mind all this is public, that doesn't mean to say that they're not taking other things seriously. So
But if I was a writer for the Sun, I would headline, UK government knows UFOs are real and plan nothing.
No, but they don't, though. You see, that's what they say. They say there's nothing of defense significance. And they've never really said that there is something they've definitely seen. They always suggest either a prosaic explanation for something, or they just say there's not enough information to make a determination. So if they had something more concrete, then you would get something in public that would say that. But that's where that sort of doesn't happen. Now, if they may have things in private they know more about, I mean, you can take the Calvine incident, the object that was seen over Scotland in 1990,
Yes.
Which I've just written about for Shadows of Your Mind magazine. So you might want to have a look at that. But there was some the UFO desk obviously received the first information from the public or from the newspaper, but some of the kind of analysis went to other people. It went to a different department for interpretation of for some of the line drawing of the photo taken from the photograph that was supposed to be taken from the negative. So that's the crude kind of drawing that you see in the official UFO files that were released to the National Archives. This kind of, it almost looks like a child's drawing of a little diamond-shaped object with a Harrier aircraft behind it. There was a photographic interpretation center, got a hold of that. It was given to them, an RAF unit that was given to them to have a look at to see what they could make of it. So that was another organization that wasn't the UFO desk. And you don't know what other sort of organizations were contacted, to go into that. From the official files, you can see they actually got in touch with RAF squadrons to find out whether it was their aircraft, but they couldn't find anything. So what was going on? There may have been other units that were involved in this, intelligence units, etc., or defense units that are not public, and that information is still sort of locked behind closed doors. So who knows?
Okay. To close on that, I would say that I know you're a bit bitter about that debate, but I'm quite jealous because we haven't reached that state in France.
Really?
So, yeah. We are very far. We are very far. So you can say you're ahead of us on that topic. So
okay.
Next one is my favorite red flag of the week. The New York Post titling UFO news is just clickbait, while they are the recordman newspapers of articles on UFOs.
Yeah,
insane.
biting the hand that feeds. Yeah.
So, before editorial board of the New York Post.
Yes. Yeah.
Such a great piece.
Yeah. And also they have a reporter by the name of Stephen Greenstreet, who your viewers may realize is the person behind the Basement Office, YouTube channel, and who provides some really good sort of videos on various aspects of the UFO issue in various cases. So it's really strange that they've come out with this, but you can understand that editors don't necessarily share the same feelings about this issue than we do, and some reporters do. The reporters, the ones that we have dealt with in the UK in terms of UAP Media UK, some of them are quite open to publishing stories about UFOs. But then when they have to get the story past their editors, that's when the headlines get changed. So you might have the headline change to something which includes UFO hunters rather than just for witness, or it might be I was changed from somebody who was an aviation enthusiast and an author. I was called an aviation expert by one newspaper in the UK for a story that they were covering. So things get changed, and it's not necessarily in terms of the hands of the journalists. It's more to do with the editorial board, who have the final sign off in what the stories look like. Now, part of this is true in terms of the headline, because a lot of UFO stories are simply clickbait for newspaper websites. They're there to actually get people to click on the story and consume the adverts. So that is partly true. But to then go on in a kind of dismissive tone that this article goes into, that's a little bit off, I think.
So what really struck me in that paper is this highlighted paragraph. And connected crackpots and cranks have gotten a few politicians to force the Pentagon to investigate the issue several times and even to hire believers for some of the work. One such nut or cynic, Luis Elizondo, claims that higher-ups ignore and actively suppress evidence of alien encounters. But the only evidence for his claim is a UAP file detailing sightings with no clear explanations.
So it's wrong in so many ways that. So
calling Luis that down.
Yeah. So calling Luis Elizondo a nut or a cynic, that's just we're not even going to go there. But then to say that he claims that people are actively suppressing evidence of alien encounters. He doesn't say that. He never mentions aliens anyway. He's at pains not to mention anything about the possible causes. He'll theorize. He'll occasionally throw out kind of words that people take as being various kind of causes, but he doesn't say it himself. He's very, very careful not to come out and how he says, prejudice the issue with his own opinions. He's been at pains to say that quite a few times in various interviews, that he won't give his own opinion on what he thinks they are, and that's really good.
It's really in line with what we said at the beginning. The one that is really pushing the extraterrestrial hypothesis is Christopher Mellon, and Luis Elizondo is really careful to not speak about that. So I don't know. Do you know Saga NJT?
No.
He is a former journalist for The Hill, and he just created his own mania. Breaking Point, and he make very in-depth analysis of the political system. And recently, he made one of the UFO treatment by the Pentagon, and using the New York Times articles that leaked some information before the release of the UAPTF report. And he said that it's typically what the Pentagon does to control a narrative. And it's really interesting to see that he explained the exchange of information if the DoD can control the headline. And I think what we are seeing there, especially from the editorial board, is the voice of the Pentagon. It's the faction in the DoD that is clearly against Luis Elizondo and try to crush him as hard as they can.
Well, it's certainly a hit piece. It basically goes for Luis Elizondo in a big way, and it goes for basically everybody connected with pushing for answers. It doesn't pull any punches in terms of how it's very dismissive of everybody and their efforts. Yes. And it's very strange as well, because it doesn't seem to sort of go too much into any kind of reasons why they've sort of thought this. It's very flimsy as well, and it doesn't take account of a lot of sort of facts, as it were, which is very strange for an editorial in terms of you think they would be fact checking what they're saying.
And it's a very small editorial. Look at that. It's barely a paragraph in the book.
It just seems rushed as well, and it's also very clumsy. Yes, I think as well, and the language that they're using.
Poorly written. It's not even at the standard of the New York Post.
Now, for mind you, the New York Post is probably more what you might call a tabloid rather than the New York Times.
Yeah, sure. I know the story of the New York Post, but even for the New York Post, it's really, really lame.
Yeah.
And
I just wonder where. Sorry,
Yes,
I just wonder whether Stephen Greenstreet, when he read that, if he has read it, I just wonder when he winced.
He quoted it and he said, ironically, it's neat.
Yeah, that damning with praise.
I loved it. I loved it. And the worst is that everybody tried to torpedo him afterward because they thought it wasn't ironic.
Well, he's got nothing to do. He's got nothing to do with
horrible.
This. Yeah, he's got nothing to do with this piece. To be fair to him, so
yes. So the last nail in the coffin is that they quote astrophysicist Adam Frank. For my French viewer, they know Adam Frank. We destroy these papers, but if you never read Adam Frank, you need to read his piece for the New York Times. So it's behind a paywall now, but you will have a link in the description. And it's just a complete mayhem of scientific method. It has no relation to scientific inquiry at all. It's just a title piece based on his doctorate of astrophysicist. You can destroy every single sentence written in that paper. That's just amazing. And it's quoted as a reference in this paper from the editorial board of the New York Post.
You find that it's one of these cases where they have a position and then they find facts to support the position rather than look at information that then supports a conclusion. So these times, I think that sometimes they get things the wrong way around for a scientific method. And it did really surprise me that somebody would come out and say something like that. But then again, as you say, he's got past form for not doing things properly. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. So, and the apex of irony, the exact same day they published that paper, they published a video about a UFO sighting on their official YouTube channel.
Yes.
The level of irony is just beyond human.
Well, that's the clickbait, though, isn't it? Because they still want people to read the newspaper online, and that's a good way of getting people on the website and keeping them there and exposing them to advertising. So on one hand, they're dismissing UFOs, but they're quite happy to use them when it gets people to their site, and that just says everything, really.
The death of reporting.
Well, yeah.
So we have to conclude. Two very good papers to recommend to our viewers. The first one is in Scientific American, Avi Loeb, How Humanity Can Earn the Respect of Extraterrestrials. And I think it's really interesting because also it's an opinion piece, so it's not endorsed by Scientific American, it's just hosted. But what is really interesting is that he notes that Winston Churchill first started to write an essay about alien life and what was the implications for human life. Sadly, there was the Second World War, so it's been buried, and it's very hard to obtain a full copy of it. If ever you came across one, I'd like a copy. But a very good piece, and I think it's the best text of philosophy of science and science of philosophy you can find out there, because it's really easy to read. It's filled with very good quotes and reference. So I cannot recommend enough that paper. Did you have time to read it?
I've had a quick look at it before I came on. Yeah, the first is that people should get together rather than fight each other. They should be looking at ways to sort of work together. And that working together would then make it much easier to look for signs of extraterrestrial life, and would actually show any extraterrestrial civilization that was looking at us that we're not all about just conflict. We're more about resolution and about working together. So yeah, but it seemed quite interesting. I need to have a proper read through it after I finish here. So it did look really interesting.
And the last one I would recommend is my gold medal of the week. Star News, sources full of secrets looking into New Zealand's unexplained UFO sightings. Just a marvelous piece. I learned so much from reading it. I did not know that New Zealand had UFO cases, and they have very interesting ones, very old ones, very anomalous. So a very, very good paper.
Yeah, they do. This is how you should write an article about UFOs. You don't have to be wholeheartedly behind the subject and agree with everything. You just have to lay out, what people report and let the readers make their own minds up. And so this was much better.
Yes.
And it says it goes back to a historical sighting. Now, the New Zealanders, like the Australians, have been quite open in terms of what information they've released. Certainly, New Zealand have basically opened their doors to their UFO, to the official UFO reporting that they've done over the years. Now, you can even go further back than the issue that's the case that's mentioned in this particular article, which is from 1978, I believe. You can go back to the 1950s in some of the reporting. So you can, and these files are actually online. You can get a hold of them. I've managed to look at most of the files that they've released, and they are very interesting. So yeah, to think that there's no cases in New Zealand. Well, there have been cases. It actually references July 1909 about unnatural objects. Now that was actually, it doesn't mention in the article, but they were mystery airships, funnily enough, because there was a big mystery airship wave all across the world at that year, which is on the back of the ones in the late 1890s in America. So yeah, that's what they refer to there. But they've had sightings, since over various years.
A very, very interesting report. I will put link in the description to access both articles and public files about UFO reports. And recently, the Australia also released its UFO files. So I think it's a good move forward when more countries open their archives on that subject, because very old case can't be classified. There is nothing to classify inside. No tech can sustain 70 years of progress. So I think we will see more and more archives opening. Yeah,
the UK apparently, the MOD destroyed a lot of files allegedly that were from the sort of late 1950s, 1960s, etc. So there's only a certain amount of files which have been released to our national archives. Those are available online, and there are some very early 1950s reports which survived this sort of cull of the reports. So yeah, they're all available to look at. That some of them aren't that exciting. That they are literally, I saw a light in the sky last night. Can you tell me what it is? And there are some really way out kind of letters, some really wacky, very, very crazy kind of correspondence as well from people who clearly have issues about, just generally mental issues. They're writing some really strange stuff in pages and pages and pages as well. And a lot of it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Also, there's some sort of copies of various magazines by various contactee groups and other groups, UFO groups that appear in the official records that have been released to the archives. So yeah, the UK have released some as well, but the New Zealand ones are fascinating. There was even one report of a pilot talking about a Foo Fighter case from 1943, which I managed to find in those records. He'd written a letter to a New Zealand politician in 1955, would you believe? And that's in the files, which I've managed to use for the Foo Fighter book I'm writing. So it's minor information just for that alone.
So any news about that very requested book about Foo Fighters?
Oh, well, yeah. So at the moment, there is somebody writing the foreword for it. I'm not prepared to say who they are at the moment, but they're doing that. And when that's done, then it's good to go. So I'm just waiting for that to happen at the moment. And then the book just gets proofread and then it's out. So yeah.
So if you still have a little time, I usually take questions from the public at the end of each show.
Yeah, sure.
So we have Eternalist Presentist qui asked, have you witnessed a UAP UFO? Where does your interest in the subject come from?
Okay, my interest started before I saw a UFO. I've only ever seen one. I was interested in science fiction when I was about 7, 8, 9-year-old. So I was quite young when I was reading. And my mother bought me a book which she thought was another science fiction book, but it turned out to be a book on UFOs. And that's how I started. It had a similar cover. It had a picture of a spacecraft on the front of it. So that's how it started. I saw a UFO, well, what I think was something I couldn't explain when I was 12 or 13 years old. I was in my local schoolyard. Out of school, it was a weekend. And I saw a teardrop-shaped craft that was on its side. It wasn't upright. It wasn't a balloon. It wasn't a microlight. It wasn't an airplane. I'm interested in airplanes. I have been since I was 4-year-old. So I knew, and it was near the airport. I know what the aircraft that came out of the airport looked like. This didn't look like anything like that. I saw it briefly. It went behind a cloud, and that's pretty much all what my sighting was. I still don't know what it was to this day. And
by definition, they are unknowns.
Exactly, yeah. It didn't affect me greatly. I didn't have any life-changing experience because I saw it. I simply saw it on my own one day and went, I don't know what that is, and then just watched it. And then watched it went behind a cloud, and it was the whole sighting was maybe 5-10 seconds long. It wasn't that long, but it basically reinforced what I'd been reading. So I've been reading about UFOs, for quite a few years by then, and that was when I thought, yeah, there's definitely something to this. If I can see one, then yes, these people who are saying they see one, see all these different shapes.
I agree.
They are obviously telling, they're telling what they see. So yeah.
So an interesting question from the same fellow. Which will be, in your opinion, the first country on Earth making the disclosure? Japan, Russia, China, North Korea, India? Maybe because country with dharmic religions, with notions of devas, vihamanas, USA, etc.
Well, at one stage there were talk of a smaller country doing it through the United Nations, because there was Grenada, wasn't there? Was a small Caribbean country, and then there's talk, something like that, and then there's talk about countries like San Marino or other small, very small nation states going to the United Nations and getting the ball rolling. So it could come from somewhere like that. I don't know the answer to that question. Something could happen tomorrow.
What would you prefer? What country
what would I prefer?
You want?
I would have thought that if America or Russia or China come out with this, there's too much in the political stakes. I think it would be the other two countries, whoever they were. Let's say for instance Russia came out with this. Most of the NATO nations and and America would probably be quite, sort of suspect what their motives were, and there'll be a lot of that. Unless it was something uncontroversial, then they'll be questioning what was happening. If the Americans came out with it, the Russians and the Chinese would be doing the same. So you'd be better if you had a third party involved, some African nation or an Asian nation or a South American nation come out with the story first. That they don't have a political axe to grind or a dogmatic axe to grind. That would be the best solution, because it would be much better for the world to swallow. They would, it's coming from, say, Argentina, or it's coming from South Africa, then that would be much better than if it was coming from Russia or China or America.
But would the international community believe them?
Well, it depends on what that proof was, wouldn't it? It depends whether they're showing pictures of a craft outside whatever government house they have, or they've got wreckage, or they've got a dead alien, or something like that. Something that can be, and then obviously other countries' news medias would go and find the story out from themselves, and if it was something that they couldn't fake or they couldn't hide, then that's when the news would get out, and then other countries would then have to go, there's something to this. So I think it would be better if it comes from a third party rather than from the big three countries, and even maybe a European country.
I have a story for you, because it comes really close from what you're saying. So it's I'm not sure it's right, but the source have been heavily recommended. So take that with a grain of salt, but it has been recommended. Let's say in the I must be careful. In a desert in the south of America, it's global. They found some remains that are very anomalous if they are humans. The main point of interest is that the cranium, the skull, is not enlarged but bigger. It hasn't been deformed in a specific shape. It's just big, and the internal cavity is big. So the point is that there are genetic analyses that are being run on these remains, but a preliminary article has been sent and has been denied, even if the intelligence inside it is true. So I'm not sure that even with the best proof, if it doesn't come out from the United States or Russia, people will accept it.
I just think if from the United States, there are so many people who class things as being fake news that even if somebody came out and said, "Yeah, we have proof of a crash," so half the population wouldn't believe it.
Good point.
Would they? Because it depends on who says it. So if Biden said it, then a lot of other people might say, "Oh, it's just Biden saying." If Trump had said it, I mean, what happens if Trump had come out with disclosure? Would people have believed him around the world? So that's the way you need to look at that.
Oh,
So
very good.
I think,
Very good point. Very good point. We have a question from Exobiology. Hello. For the Calvin case, did the people who took the pictures testify?
No, they didn't. I'm not sure how far I can go with this, but they were supposed to be hill walkers, but they might not be hill walkers. There were just two men who were on the hillside that night, and it's not entirely clear who they were, why they were there, why they had a camera. All we know is that they were on the hillside with a camera, and they took supposedly 6 photographs of this object. The photographs have never appeared. The negatives were supposedly passed to the Ministry of Defense by the newspaper that they give the negatives to, and then that was the last they were seen. They were never seen again. So, and as far as the witnesses being interviewed, then the paper, the Daily Record, are very tight-lipped about it. They won't say anything about the incident whatsoever. And that could be because there was an official, what they call a D notice, slapped on the newspaper, which means they can't talk about it. That's up for debate. Yeah, nobody knows whether that's the case or not. It's suspected in some quarters that might be the case. It's not proven.
It's something that actually exists in the UK press.
It used to be called a D. It's a voluntary code. If it's something of national security measures, the government can.
Okay.
It used to be called a D notice. It's called a DSMA notice now. It's basically it's a gag on the press, but it's a one where they sign up to voluntarily. So if the MOD came to them and said, "We'd like you not to print this. There's a national security issue," the newspaper will go, "Okay, yes, I will. We won't print."
Yes, I understand.
So, and that used to happen. It was a kind of very kind of amicable arrangement. Rather than being a heavy-handed, "You're not going to print this, otherwise there's going to be problems," kind of thing. They don't threaten to do that. So anyway, there's an issue. There's a kind of debate as to whether or not that actually occurred. It's still not clear. But one way or another, the paper won't talk about it or can't talk about it. The people who were involved in the newspaper are dead now anyway. They don't work for the newspaper, and a lot of them have passed away. It's not even clear if the two witnesses are still alive. Nobody knows who they are. The names have never been released. That could be the only information that's in those files that's yet to come out. The files that have been kept until 2072. There's a strand of thought that thinks that it's just the personal details, which are still yet to be released, because we have data protection laws, which a lot of companies follow quite rigorously. And there's a school of thought that thinks that they're waiting until like 100 years or there or thereabouts, how old the people might be, so therefore they'll be dead, and therefore that's when they can release the names and addresses. So that might be the
Okay.
case. Some other people think that there's more to the files.
And would you
There's more
recommend
secrets.
a specific book where people can find out real good information about the Kelvin case?
By Kelvin, no. There's no real book where there's a huge breakdown. There are books that cover it. There's actually a book that's been published recently, which is called "What Do They Really Know" by M.S. Morgan. That I believe that covers the case
Cool.
at some
I will
stage.
put a link in the description.
It covers a lot of other British cases, aircraft cases as well, involving sort of either military aircraft or RAF stations, etc. So that's that's not too bad. The other source of information about Kelvin is actually something that I wrote for Shadows of Your Mind magazine, the online magazine. So that's an in-depth look at the Ministry of Defence's response to the case and to all the official correspondence that they've issued and the stuff that's in the files. So that's a 7-page breakdown of the case.
Okay.
So yeah, and also a couple of other cases as well, which happened about the same time. Again, it's still not clear whether that was actually some kind of secret American aircraft. There was another case in 1994 which happened to Boscombe Down, which probably did involve a secret aircraft. But then again, that was a kind of a thing where there was a lot of kind of a strange incident, which I go into in the article as well. So I'll link 3 things together. But the Kelvin incident is front and center in that article. And well, some of the people say it's well worth reading. So there you go.
I think I will invite Mr. Partridge to come around and show his paper.
He should, yeah.
So we have the next question from Nuki. I'm wondering if Mellon will, at some point, stop talking about a national threat only for the US and start pushing the idea that humans must and will face this threat together.
Well, I suppose, yeah, you've got to discuss about whether it's a threat, first of all, because a lot of people aren't entirely clear, are they? There's a huge debate at the moment, isn't there, with the people who follow Stephen Greer, because he's been pushing that kind of, there's no threat, aliens are all cuddly and wonderful, aren't they? He's been pushing that side of things. So he's been attacking Christopher Mellon, he's been attacking Luis Elizondo about them
and very violently
yes, to be fair, yes, quite forcibly, yeah. And some people say he's just doing that because he wants to push his CE5 angle, and that might be fair. But so there's a debate at the moment which is going on about whether it's a threat in the first place. Now, it's a threat in terms of an intelligence failure, as we discussed earlier, that they've got a gap in their knowledge, and that's always a threat. Military intelligence people will see that as a threat. Whether it's a threat to humanity is a different matter. But they can only talk in US terms because they don't speak for other countries and they don't have access to information, or the kind of decision-making apparatus that goes on in, say, France or Germany or the UK. So they've got no real influence on that. So they can only influence matters in the US. And even then, there's probably a limit to what they can do, and they've done quite a lot already. So whether they can, yes, okay, they could talk about a worldwide threat, but how much weight it would carry in Russia or China, well, it would carry no weight at all, would it? The Chinese.
Very good point.
The Chinese have, they clamp down on internet access in their country, so you can't Google to say what's happened around the world. You can only get the Chinese intranet or whatever it's called. So they can only look at their own news. So they won't know about what's being said about their country, about whether it's a worldwide threat or not. The Russians will take it presumably as being some kind of Western propaganda, because they're still, it's still them versus us in many ways. So yeah, quite fragmented really, aren't we, in terms of looking at things in terms of worldwide terms. And
it's a very good point. I think we have the illusion that to have that phenomena to be vastly known across all population will unite humans. I think we are way dumber than we expect.
We can't even unite for other things. Never mind a worldwide threat yet. I mean that theoretically, that's the thing that everybody said would unite the planet. I mean, Reagan said that, and Gorbachev said that, didn't they? Back in the 1980s. But at the moment, we're not in that position. We're still too tribal. We're still fighting over bits of land in the South China Sea and other places around the country, around the world, and resources, and you name it. Just because you don't like what somebody else's flag is, half the time that kicks people off. So, or which football team you support, all this kind of thing. So crackers. We're too busy fighting about really insignificant things.
I think so. From the first fellow, do you know if in United States, with this possible disclosure, some new laws could be passed, voted to protect all entities with high consciousness, a kind of extension of the domain of person?
Well, eternalist presentist. I'm afraid I'm in the UK, so I don't have any kind of sort of knowledge about how laws can be passed in the US to protect people with that kind of criteria. That would be a question that would be better off put
let's transpose it to the UK, for example.
Okay, but the UK. So let's say, arguments say tomorrow they came out and said that there's something going on, and here's disclosure. These beings exist. Could they protect them? Yeah, of course they could, if they wanted to. Yeah, anything's possible. They could they could pass laws to protect people with high consciousness levels. So that, are you talking about like humans? Are you talking about dolphins? Are you talking about other types of mammal, gorillas, apes? Or are you talking about others, people from elsewhere? Yeah, quite easily.
I think it's a culture question because, for example, in China they can eat dogs. In France, we can eat horses. So I think it's more a cultural approach than a legal one. I think because of legal issues, it will be very hard to pass on because it gives them rights. And there is a very old text called the debate of Valladolid that happened a few centuries ago about are Indians in America human beings, and do they have soul? And I think it will be pretty much the same debate. And at the end, it was determined that they had soul. So I think it will be a very important moment in our history when that happens.
So yeah, I mean, what you're saying there about talking about people who they probably consider to be inferior to them, because that's how they would view the Indian Americans. You've got to look at it the other way as well, haven't you? Because if there's beings coming here to visit, then how do they view us?
Exactly.
So it's not a case of how we treat them necessarily. It's more how they look upon us and how they treat us, because invariably we'll be a lesser form of life in terms of intelligence and ability than they will be.
There is a very interesting book called Stalking the Earth by Chris O'Brien, where he investigated hundreds of cattle mutilations over 10 years. And what was the most striking is that compared to other countries, for example, India, that has a gigantic population of cattle, there is no mutilation. In the US, there is a gigantic amount of mutilations, and that's only the mutilation we heard about. The very strange ones, people don't talk about it because it decreases the value of the ranch. So he said there is really an interesting symmetry between how we treat animals and how we are being treated by the phenomena.
Yeah, strange, because India aren't cows sacred in India, so you'd think you would hear about it if it happened.
So we have another question from Seberi. We must again be aware of the United States government imperialism, how to stop them hiding crucial data to the entire world, how to avoid their threat narration.
I suppose you could say the same against the Russian and Chinese as well. They're probably all as bad as each other in terms of what you class as imperialism. They're effectively the three superpowers on the planet in terms of what their capabilities are. So they'll all be at this. Whether or not they're going to hide information or whether they just don't know what's going on, again, that's another debate entirely. How to avoid their threat narrative? Well, depends on what kind of threat you're talking about. So I don't really know is the answer to that. We're not the people who make the decisions in terms of what is and what isn't a threat. The military and the intelligence agencies are always the people who do that in whichever country you're talking about. And whether or not information's hidden away, information's hidden away all the time by most countries. They keep secrets.
I'm not really sure Russia will register into the threat narrative, because from the report I have from them, it's more baffling than threatening.
Russia have threat narratives. They have
yes.
threat narratives all the time. They've been historically a country which has always had some kind of threat or other, and it's usually from the countries that surround them.
No, I mean on UFOs.
But they've always played to a threat in that term. So they would, if they were going to use a threat narrative, they would spin it in that way somewhere. They would, if it comes to it, they'll probably say, they might well say that they're just foreign drones. I'm surprised they haven't gone down that route yet either. But yes, they are. My theory about everything that's going on at the moment is just they're all baffled. None of them have a clue.
Yes.
They have information. They have more data than you or I do, and everybody else who looks at this from the outside. But that doesn't mean to say they're any further forward. Just as they have more information. They may have had information since the late 1940s, and they may even have crashed vehicles. But that doesn't mean to say they actually know what's happening. It's even if they had something back in 1947, they probably wouldn't have understood what it was, let alone fly it or operate or even get into it. And they'll just put it to one side and okay, we'll wait until our technology improves and our methodology improves. Much like what it said in the UAP task force report, we'll have to wait until we catch up with being able to work out what things are, so we can analyze them and understand them. And they probably just go back to these things if that's what happens, maybe every 5 or 10 years, and goes, okay, can we understand it yet? And say yes or no question. No, right, we'll wait another 10 years. And that's what they do. But in the meantime, all these things keep happening and they're just no further forward. Yes, okay, they probably have a mountain of information, sightings, they probably have a repository of information somewhere in different countries that say, yeah, this happened on a certain date. Yeah, all this happened. Here's some film, here's some video, here's some sensor imagery, here, all the rest of it. But it doesn't mean to say they actually have any clue what's going on.
The question still stands: how to avoid a threat narration?
I don't think you can avoid a threat narrative from a country if they're hell bent on doing it. That's the way they work, isn't it? That's why they've.
I have to admit that I'm trying to come up with an historical example, but I can't find anyone where a threat narrative has been countered.
No, but they don't, because countries always have an enemy, inverted commas, when they need something or they're having trouble. Argentina had the UK as a threat when the Falklands War. That was how they spun that. It was, these islands are ours. The British have taken them away. That's a threat because they've taken something that's legally ours. Second World War, the lead up to the Second World War, Germany was pushing a threat about all the countries around it. They were all sort of doing this, doing that, and they were trying to stifle the economic progress. They were taking away land that was theirs. It was always somebody else's problem, somebody else's fault that there was a problem in Germany. So there was that kind of thing. We needed more room, so it was expansionism. The Russians have done the same. They've always operated when it was a communist country. They were always under the impression they were trying to sell it to their people that it was like NATO ganging up on them, or this kind of thing, or Germany was a threat. All this kind of stuff. They all do it different times. They
So
still
I
do it
have
today.
I have two examples. I have the peaceful revolution by Gandhi in India, when he took power without using force and saying he will never use force, and it worked. And I have Switzerland, where they countered the threat narrative by just arming everybody, so nobody tried to attack them.
Well, it's a very
That's
difficult
the
country to
two
invade.
only examples I can find about. It's a very good question, to be honest. I never thought about how can we counter a threat narration when you can't talk to the other.
You can't, because we're hamstrung because we don't know what's going on. So we can't sort of counter or threaten a narrative by saying this is what the situation is. These are the facts. Here's the information that supports that conclusion. We don't have that information, so they can merrily go on with this threat narrative and keep saying there's something going on. But then again, there is a threat narrative because they've already admitted that they don't know what's happening. And to the military intelligence people, that is a threat.
Very, very good question from Seberi. In South America,
I can't answer that. I can't answer that one.
I have no idea what it means. South America, but Jane is human.
No,
I don't understand.
Sorry, no.
It's lacking words.
I've got about 5 minutes, if that's all right.
Well, I think we covered pretty much everything.
Okay.
I thank you. Another one. We covered everything.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we covered that one,
we went full circle. I thank you so much for you being here. Your enlightenments were invaluable.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I was some use. Yeah. No, thank you, Baptiste. It was good to speak to you again. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay.
Goodbye, Rendall. Graeme.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
If anybody wants to see the Shadows of Your Mind magazine, literally just Google Shadows of Your Mind, and it's free to download. You don't have to pay for it. Mr. Partridge, who runs it, he's a colleague of mine at UAP Media UK. He'll be very pleased if you download the magazine and read it. It's not just about Calvi, there's a whole load of other things.
No. It's a very, very
really,
good
really
magazine. I heavily recommended it, and there will be a link in the description on the top.
Yeah. And that's fine. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle's there. So I'm always happy to talk to people if people want to get in touch with me. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See you again. Bye.